Jordan Neely, a tragic victim of homelessness and mental health neglect on the NYC subway. Jordan Neely, a well-known subway performer and Michael Jackson impersonator, died on May 1st after being put in a chokehold by a Marine veteran, David Penny, on the F train in New York City. Neely's death has been ruled a homicide by a medical examiner, but Penny has not been charged, and authorities have not released key details about the incident. Lawyers for Penny claim that he acted in self-defense, while advocates for Neely say that a cycle of violence, mental health problems, and poverty led to the tragedy aboard the subway. Neely had experienced mental health problems since the age of 14 when his mother was brutally murdered, and he had intermittently experienced homelessness leading up to his death. In this article, we explore Neely's life and the events leading up to his tragic death. Trauma from childhood to adulthood. Jordan Neely began experiencing mental health problems at the age of 14 when his mother was brutally murdered. Neely's mother was strangled at age 36 by her boyfriend in the apartment where she and her teen son lived. When Neely tried to say goodbye to his mother before leaving for school the day of her murder, he did not know her fate. He only knew that her boyfriend had told him he could not enter the bedroom where his mother's body was. Neely's mother's murderer was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Lawyers for Neely's family said the trauma of his mother's murder was the kind of trauma that could cause anyone to unravel, and this was a family that was extremely burdened. Neely's childhood and adulthood dreams. Neely grew up in a family of musicians who want him to be remembered as a human being. His mother was a professional singer, and his father performed with a music group. Neely also had a flair for song and dance, which he would pursue into adulthood. Later in his life, Neely was known locally as a Michael Jackson impersonator who danced in the Times Square Transit hub and was a beloved part of many New Yorkers' daily commute. By then, he suffered from depression, according to his lawyer, Lennon Edwards. Neely experienced homelessness intermittently leading up to his death. He spent some time living with an aunt, some time at a shelter, and some time on the street. When he was killed, Neely still had a dream, and still wanted to accomplish something, and still had motivation to do it, Edwards said. Where he was in the process it's hard to say, but he still had aspirations. What happened leading up to Jordan Neely's death? Witnesses and statements from lawyers paint an incomplete picture of a subway incident that quickly escalated into an extended, fatal chokehold. While riding the subway, Neely had been yelling about how hungry, thirsty, and fed up he was before Penny held him in a chokehold for 6 to 15 minutes on the floor of the train car, according to interviews Edwards and his legal team conducted with witnesses, the lawyer said. Witnesses told police Neely had been acting hostile and erratic toward other subway passengers when he was approached by Penny. But Neely had not physically attacked anyone, according to the bystander who filmed the video. Advocates for Neely say that Penny's violent, lethal chokehold was an unacceptable stand-in for a public safety response that was lacking Monday afternoon in the subway. Advocates call for justice for Neely. Advocates are calling for justice for Neely after New York City police released Penny following questioning Monday. The law firm representing Neely's family said in a statement that while they understand our current times have created a heightened sense of fear, sometimes reasonable, sometimes not, there has to be a clear line of when lethal force can be used by anyone, including civilians. Advocates for Neely say that a cycle of violence, mental health problems, and poverty led to the tragedy aboard the subway, and that the public should focus on the needs of people experiencing homelessness and mental illness to understand Neely's tragic, sudden, and violent death. The dehumanization of people experiencing homelessness and mental health complexities. In a Wednesday news release, Vocal New York, a grassroots political organization fighting for the needs of low-income people, said Neely's death came after elected officials successfully campaigned to keep poor people in jails and flooded our subways with cops. The organization also said Neely's death is the direct result of abandonment and dehumanization of people experiencing homelessness and mental health complexities. Neely's death is directly linked to the fact that people of color are overrepresented among the U.S. homeless population, and that people experiencing homelessness are routinely criminalized, according to the National Homelessness Law Center. Unhoused people are targeted with fear in NYC subway. The New York City subway, where many unhoused people often take refuge, has been the site of several killings of unhoused and housed New Yorkers in recent years. Eric Tars, legal director for the National Homelessness Law Center, said that rhetoric last year from New York City Mayor Eric Adams and other lawmakers likely drove up public fear of unhoused people experiencing mental illness on New York subways. Last year, Adams announced that law enforcement could involuntarily hospitalize unhoused people with severe mental illness who pose a risk of harm to themselves, even if they are not an imminent threat to the public. The policy's proponents, including Adams, say it's a compassionate response to the homelessness crisis. However, it overemphasizes using force to restrain people who may be experiencing homelessness, and because of that, Neely's death was predictable, Tar said. The need for a different perspective on safety. Advocates are calling for a different perspective on safety, one that is not only focused on the absence of violence but also the presence of thriving communities and well-being, where people can have their needs met. The things that he was asking for in that car, what if someone had just given him what he was asking for, something to drink, something to eat, said Jamila Hodge, executive director of the National Violence Prevention Group Equal Justice USA. Advocates are also calling for a clear line of when lethal force can be used by anyone, including civilians. Conclusion. Jordan Neely's tragic, sudden, and violent death on the New York City subway has sparked calls for justice and a different perspective on safety. Advocates for Neely say that a cycle of violence, mental health problems, and poverty led to the tragedy aboard the subway, and that the public should focus on the needs of people experiencing homelessness and mental illness to understand Neely's death. Advocates are calling for a different perspective on safety, one that is not only focused on the absence of violence but also the presence of thriving communities and well-being, where people can have their needs met.